everybody for joining today. Hope you've had a really great time so far at the distributed conference. I think it's going really well. It's been a lot of exciting conversations happening. And thanks for taking the time to join this talk. Today, we're going to talk about leveraging collective intelligence using Miro. And we're going to go through a few things. And I'm going to leave a significant amount of time at the end, probably like 10 minutes or so, to try to go through it fairly quickly, because I think it's very interesting to have the conversations at the end, because I feel like that's when a lot of really good collaboration and discovery comes in. So I'm going to leave that space open for us. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about humans, we're going to talk about machines, we're going to talk about how we get there from here, and then we're going to do a little bit of wrap up, and then we're going to do the Q&A. So let's talk a little bit about intelligence. So intelligence is an interesting word, and I think we've probably all heard it recently a lot as we're talking about artificial intelligence. And we want to talk a little bit about what that means, like what is intelligence? And in the definition of intelligence, the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. But what is collective intelligence? So collective intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills with multiple inputs. And it's something that Miro is a very powerful tool to help facilitate. This is a really interesting statistic that I got from a guy who's a psychologist at Harvard University. I just came across him when I was doing research for this talk. What he talks about, he does a lot of research around how children learn and the development of the human brain. And so this is one of the quotes from him, is that humans remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, and 80% of what they see and do. So when you think about that in the context of what you use Miro for, it kind of really drives home the ability of what it can do for us as teams and collaborators and just as humans in general. But in order to leverage the intelligence, what we really need to do is understand like how it's being processed. So what's actually happening when people are getting in Miro and talking to each other and collaborating and dropping in emojis and creating sticky notes, like what's going on in that situation. So I want to talk a little bit about humans. And I'm just going to watch the chat here in case there's questions that come up. So I would like to say first, to start off, that I am not a scientist. I just read a lot and I watch a lot of PBS. So most of the learnings that I have gained about the human brain are just from fascination with it, and as a designer and a researcher, trying to really understand what's actually happening up there, so I can use that knowledge when I'm getting people to move from like point A to point B, and try to get them to kind of work with each other and come to some sort of progress or growth through whatever is happening with our interactions. So when you think about the human brain, basically what's happening is we're constantly trying to make order out of chaos. And what's interesting about it is that every single human brain does it a little bit differently. So everybody's brain is a little bit different, and everybody's thinking a little bit different. So what we're doing though is we're trying to classify things. So like it's almost, it's very similar to how artificial intelligence works. So when object identification happens, like it sees an object and it says, oh, is that a car? Is it a truck? Is it a bike? You know, it has wheels. It must be one of those things. So we're doing the same thing, and then we're making decisions based on those classifications. And we're also doing that in order to give ourselves direction and to understand where we need to go and what we need to do. So when you think about in the context of human evolution, what was happening on the savannah when you were out hunting and you would see a lion, your brain is very rapidly saying, oh my gosh, there's something over there. What is it? And then going through the classification very quickly to understand what it is, and then making a determination on what we should do. So should you run? Should you, is it a fight or is it a flight situation? Like, what exactly needs to happen. And just recently, I read this research about something called place cells that we have in our brains. And what those place cells do is they actually connect to specific locations. So we remember and are able to form directions in our brains based on specific cells attaching to specific locations that we are aware of, which is really interesting when you think about it in the context of Miro, because there are a lot of things going on where are location based as you're mapping things out. And then we have a bunch of chemical reactions going on, right? So there's all of these chemicals that are constantly like activating and shifting in levels in our brains, and those are making us react and do things and feel a certain way, and deciding what to say and deciding how to feel and deciding what to think. And what's interesting is that when you start to put things, when you start to make order out of chaos, your brain rewards you with dopamine. So you're getting a little bit of a like pleasure effect from basically going through things in Miro. That's why a lot of times teams find it very rewarding and very fun to do things in Miro, because there's chemical reactions happening in your brain. And then I love this. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is a meme that's on Facebook a lot, or on Twitter and social media. But basically, we're plants with emotions. We have like this need to be nurtured and to receive certain things to help us thrive and grow. And it affects our moods and our feelings, and our moods and our feelings affect how we communicate and also how we interact with each other. So when you're facilitating a Miro session, or you're working asynchronously or one-to-one or somebody in Miro, it's really, I think, good to be aware and empathetic of what's happening with the other people that you're working with, and what you maybe as the facilitator or as a contributor need to do to help them move from point A to point B to get to where you want to go with the session. Yeah, those place cells are really interesting. I have to research that more. That was a really good one. Visual syncing has psychological benefits. So if this image in the background, by the way, all the images in here I generated with Miro AI. So it was interesting to use that and figure out like what to use. But this image is from a cave painting in the south of France. It's one of the oldest known drawings of man, of Homo sapiens. And it's interesting when there's been lots of research around what happens with visual thinking, like how your brain, it helps your brain like rationalize things because you're putting them in order and making decisions because they become clear in an organized fashion, and then managing difficult situations. So a lot of times in psychology, or when counselors or psychologists are working with children, they have them draw pictures, and it helps them to kind of process, maybe trauma that they've been through or things that they can't explain with words. And it also just helps with our behavior and our ability to think clearly. And I really love this this tweet because I think that when you're thinking about how people are thinking, this really brings a lot of context to our modern society. So it says, "Hey, sorry, I missed your text. I'm processing a nonstop 24/7 onslaught of information with a brain designed to eat berries in a cave." And I love that quote, or I love that tweet, because it's it really, we are constantly getting information coming in. And I think when you're working in Miro, sometimes it's very easy for it to get a bit overwhelming. So I think that people who are facilitating sometimes have a secondary role of helping to manage the information and intelligence that's being collected and put it into a way format that helps everybody. I'm gonna have to go faster because I'm not gonna get to my questions or comments. So when you're working in Miro, you're doing, it's basically like you're doing a puzzle. And when you're doing a puzzle, your brain goes into this mode like it thinks it's hunting, which is a really interesting thing, because when you think about that is kind of what you're doing. So it helps you to understand that you're seeking out information, and then when you discover it, your brain registers that, and then chemical reactions occur. And when people work together on puzzles, it creates really personal connections and improves memory. And then if you look at Miro, I just took a screenshot of some of the top things that people use in Miro. So these are puzzles, like these things that people are putting together in a collaborative way are puzzles, and you're solving it together. So all the same things that are happening when you do a puzzle together are happening in Miro. So this is just a little talk about machines. I just wanted to bring this in. I don't want to go overboard on machines because I feel like our brains are like saturated with machine talk recently. But this is a quote from Don Norman, and I think probably most of you have heard of him, but it's the duty of machines and those who design them to understand people. It is not our duty to understand the arbitrary, meaningless dictates of machines. So that was said a long time ago. It was, I believe it was in his book as well, but times have changed. And this is my perspective, but I think it's not only our duty, but necessary to our future to understand the potential and the dictates of machines. And that means understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they got their information. And Kevin Kelly is one of the founders of Wired Magazine. He's a really amazing human, and highly recommend reading any of his books. But he talks about something called he was on a podcast that I really like recently, and this is a quote from him where he was talking about AI, and he talks about it as the consensus of the average. So most AI, as it's functioning, it doesn't know the information that's coming in, whether it's right or wrong, especially when it pertains to text. So most of like things that are being generated from like ChatGPT or similar technologies, they don't have any context of the information that they got, if it's valid, if it's invalid, who wrote it, like how true it is, was the person who wrote that information and posted it somewhere actually qualified to say that information. So it's an interesting thing to think about. And as designers, when we go forward and start to design like experiences for people using generative AI and AI in general, we need to think about that. And we need to build in content and context around what we're actually producing, so that we give our end customers and users and humans in general a good experience, one that is trustworthy. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we get there from there, and I'm trying to do this really fast. This is just a really quick, like, bit about helping people move from one point to the other. So the essence of creativity is how to use what you already know in order to go beyond what you already think. That's another quote from our friend Jerome. And I think it's really powerful because we all know what we know, but the goal of being creative and innovation in general is to get beyond that. So leverage what you have to get beyond where you are. And then I love this quote from Einstein: you can't use an old map to explore a new world. So when you're in Miro, you're constantly creating maps. There's just maps and maps and maps. And I'm a big fan of the scientific method. And the scientific method is to question, research, hypothesize, test, analyze, and then report, and then do it again. And it helps you to generate outcomes. And when you apply to products, basically what's happening is you're asking yourself, what's happening? And then let's investigate and find the human needs. And then here's an opportunity. And then let's try it out. And then did it work? And then release it if it did work. If it didn't work, let's talk about what we found and see what we should do next. And then when you think about how Miro helps at each one of these phases, so you have like questions, you can use question boards. You have let's investigate human needs. You can use empathy maps, job maps, and journey maps. And then you have opportunity. That's where you might explore how might we statements or we believe that statements. And then you do a let's try it out. That could be a journey map or an experience map or a really lo-fi prototype in Miro. And then there's a synthesis of did it work? And then you release it. And then you do a retrospective or talk about what you found. So all those things, Miro can help with the whole process of going through the scientific method. And this is just kind of a more like journey map version of what's happening. It's the same thing, but it's just in a linear fashion as a product journey. So I'll wrap up real quick. So basically, how does it help us leverage collective intelligence? It empowers human brains supported by machines. It works similar to using a puzzle or using a map. And it supports research, discovery, and innovation to generate outcomes. That's all. Do we have any questions? I don't see any questions, Marissa. If you do, it'd be good to hear people's thoughts actually on that stuff as well. I think that's actually where I get a lot of value out of it. I've often wondered, at what point is the machine's intelligence not artificial? That's a really good question. Or, I don't think I have the answer to that. But there, it's interesting because as machine intelligence improves and grows, it's going to become closer and closer to human intelligence, right? So I don't know. I mean, if humans are inputting the intelligence into machines, we might reverse the roles so that it's humans building machines and the machines become the main intelligence. Oh, well, we have 5 more minutes. I could talk about a couple other things then. If we don't have any questions. I'll show a couple of things that I did recently that might help you. So this is a empathy map that we did for a DevSecOps person. That's a technical person who operates in a IT or security infrastructure team, and they manage the security of what's happening with the platform. So they're looking for people that are attacking basically networks or servers or something within your system. And the way I like to do empathy maps is I do the research, conduct the interviews, and then I plot on the different, this is a kind of a template from Miro that I modified. I plot on the different areas, what they're thinking and feeling, seeing, saying, and doing and hearing, and then I connect them. So like I say, they might be thinking, is this important? And then they might be thinking, what's the most important? And then they might be doing a drill down analysis to find what's most important. So I try to connect what's happening to what the results are. So if they're thinking this, they're saying this. And then down here, I just try to put it in a user-friendly way for our teams. So these are the bad things that they're like not happy about. And then these are the things that are good. I might find additional resources on, hang on. How do you detect overload in a group? Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. Well, I think there's kind of 2 types of overload. Sometimes you get overload of people talking, where people are like kind of over communicating and talking over each other, and you have to kind of pause everybody and shift them back. I think that overload too of like too much information. I feel like a lot of times when I present information or do workshops in Miro, I need to stage it out. So I have to give myself like flex time of like, I want to accomplish these things, but I have staged approaches of getting there. And I try to fulfill the basic needs. And I also do like a bit of there's a book called Sense and Respond, which is a really good book. But I do that. I sense what's happening in the room. I try to at least. And then I shift. I kind of do like an agile approach to what I'm working on or the tool that I'm using. And sometimes I'll create a tool on the fly, or I'll just start listening to people talking and make sticky notes until they start engaging and going in the direction that I want them to go. Did that help answer your question? Another question, where might I find additional resources on leveraging insights more quickly from UXR data? I would have to follow up on that one. Maybe I could produce a list that would be helpful. This last example is it's kind of a little bit small. Maybe I should have made it bigger, but after I do empathy maps, I like to do journey maps in two ways. Like I like to map out journeys in very high level of detail to explain like what is happening with software or an experience with like every single step. But I also like to do quick ones like this that show they're basically to show like other designers or the team what's kind of going through the person's mind and the main steps they're taking and how the empathy map attaches or correlates and integrates with the steps. So like there might have been a post-it that said they're looking for documentation because at the beginning they're reading documentation and they're like curious at that point, and maybe they're frustrated because the documentation is very poor. But I try to go through it that way to make it very clear and simple. Asking about the book you referenced earlier. Which one? Kevin Kelly has a book called The Inevitable, which is amazing. He also just wrote another book that I can't recall the name of right now. What specifically where I was talking about the book? Don Norman's book is The Design of Everyday Things. That might have been the one. There's also a series of books on mental models that I really love, and they're by an organization called Farnham Street, and they do a podcast called The Knowledge Project, and it is one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to, and its context is learning from what other people have already mastered, and it's really good. It's a very good podcast. I highly recommend it. Oh, that was one. Cool. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that was the time. I appreciate your time, and I hope you got some value out of this. Feel free to contact me offline, and I can maybe follow up on some of the information if anybody needs it.